When I first saw Prabhupada in New York City, and I saw him come in, whether he came down from upstairs and he sat down on the Vyasa-san, and he exuded this humility. I can't say it any other way. I'd never met anyone else like him, yet he knew everything. He was so knowledgeable. He spoke about God and about our relationship with God and about Krishna, about this material world not being our home. Whereas all the other gurus I'd been to see seemed to want to impress me that they were almost like Jesus. It says, I am the way, I am the light, I am the... And some of them had some pretty powerful energy. I remember Guru Maharaji, because my friend was becoming his disciple, and took me to see him, and he just touched me here. I felt like someone had hit me with a light stick or something from Star Wars. I mean, seriously. I mean, so he obviously had some Shakti, some energy like that, but I'd met so many of these gurus, and none of them just made me feel anything. And when I saw him, it was like, when I saw Srila Prabhupada, it was like I finally met my guru. I knew as soon as I saw him, I knew I'd met my guru. And I came back and I started to study his books, and the first few Srimad Bhagavatams were available at that time. And I realized at that time that somehow my life has taken a big turn. That there was no way from this point that I could be peripheral anymore. Because I read Alan Watts, and I used to, Baba Ram Das. I was, into Richard Alpert, and before it became Baba Ram Das. But it was all really, as Prabhupada would have said, for sense gratification. Then when I met him, Srila Prabhupada impressed me so much that actually spiritual life is something very serious. And at the same time, is something very sweet. We had a terrible car accident shortly after. We weren't there very long. And luckily, I had a 1954 Ford, which, as you would remember, they're like tanks. So we got in this accident in Honolulu, downtown, and the other car, they were destroyed. We all lived because the car was like this. And I remember Srila Kirti and I were out there. We were at Dodi's, and we're out in the street in our Brahmin underwear. Because, with the car spun around, we got thrown out into the street, and we had just come from the market. We're thinking everything's $1. I mean, this is what, 1975 or something, and we're in the street. I remember shooting Kirti thinking, oh, pick the papayas up, they were $1. So, but afterwards, when we came to see Prabhupada, Prabhupada was so compassionate. Wanted to know how we fared, how we were, from it. And actually, both of us have bad backs to this day from this. But as the weeks went on, I couldn't keep up the Pujari service. I was actually doing everything, which was very difficult. I'm a neophyte, and it was very difficult for me. And finally, I just couldn't do it. My back, I couldn't stand, I couldn't walk, I was crawling. And so I told Srila Kirti, I told him, I really need to speak to Srila Prabhupada because I can't do this. I mean, I just can't. I have to recuperate. I'll never walk again, the doctor said, if I don't do something. So the word got out that I was going to say I have to leave. Well, before I came up to the room to see Srila Prabhupada and tell him, because I really couldn't continue, I would probably had to just disappear. I would have had, because I just couldn't continue with the service. And, Guru Kripa, those that would remember him back at that time with Yashodananda, they were very, very strict. As far as what, you have to do this and that's that, and you die doing it, whatever. And they expected me, as in the illustrious Guru Kripa, who I love him. I gotta say, I love Guru Kripa, but in his illustrious words, Prabhupada gonna give you the sauce. Right? He would talk like that, exactly like that. And say, Prabhupada's gonna talk, he'll tell you where it's at. He had that gangster talk to him, almost endeared you to him in some ways. But that's what, you know what I mean? So he was there, sort of that little smirk on his face, like, Prabhupada's gonna give it to Hamsavatar now. And Prabhupada just smiled, but of course Prabhupada knew everything. He knew everything, so he just smiled and he looked right at Guru Kripa and then back at me, just like that, and said, so, what is the difficulty? The sannyasis are traveling. Yeah. His son say travel. He said worship the deities at home. He said follow the regulative principles, chant 16 rounds. So what is the difficulty? So, it meant a lot. So he was teaching me a lesson. At the same time, I'm sure he was teaching our dear godbrother Gurkripa also a lesson, Maybe if he wasn't going to be so hard on me, maybe Gurkripa shouldn't either. And it was the last time I saw Prabhupada personally that I got to go up there. And I had this idea. I wanted to study Jyotish, astrology. And I asked Prabhupada, could I study Jyotish? And Prabhupada said, it's not very important. He said it's not such an important thing, and he really didn't give it much thought at all. It was like sort of, like that. It's not very important. So I was crestfallen because I thought this was a great thing that I could use this and talk about Krishna consciousness, because Jyotish is very exacting. If you are good, with understanding the astronomical positions, you can tell a person almost everything about their life. So they become very respectful of you. So I got to ask him again a few days later, when I got to bring him his lunch. And I asked Prabhupada, and I said, I had this idea that I know you said it was not very important, but I had this idea that I could preach if I learned about Jyotish. And all of a sudden, Prabhupada's eyes lit up. It got bigger, it seemed. And he said, oh, for preaching? Then it is all right. And I smiled. Thank you, Srila Prabhupada. And I was just, so happy because I thought, that because the devotees had actually told me it was nonsense, that I shouldn't study astrology, that this is nonsense, and that this is not. And Prabhupada very simply stated that it was all right, like that. So that gave me, so since then, little by little, I started to study and found teachers in India and also in the U.S., and so gained some teeny little minute understanding of it. And it has allowed us to preach. If it wasn't for my studying Jyotish and for my wife studying Ayurveda and healing modalities, we wouldn't be able to preach like this. So it's wonderful because I feel that he actually gave me a window. He actually gave me a window that, yes, for preaching. And so what else can I say? For me, the quality in Srila Prabhupada that stood out more than anything at the time was his humility. Because it seemed that I'd never met someone so great before. I had never met someone that was with such energy that beamed like he did before. You were in Prabhupada's presence and you seemed like you were in the presence of a giant. But in actual stature, Prabhupada was barely 5 feet and a few inches tall. But he was so powerful, he was so full of chi at his age. But he was so humble. That was and I remember him saying so many times that is the first quality. That if you have not humility, then how can you possibly expect to make any advancement in spiritual life? So that was it for me, is that every other person that I had met that was a guru, that was a so-called spiritual leader, wanted you to know that. And all he wanted you to know was, please chant Hare Krishna. It's all he asked. He didn't ask for any worship. He didn't say, remember my name. You didn't see his name up in lights anywhere. All he said was, please chant Hare Krishna. So I owe Srila Prabhupada my whole existence, my everything. Je anilo premadana karuna prachu